flashy girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Oh, Mr. Sheffield, a podcast about The Nanny, a TV series from the 90s starring Fran Drescher. This is this is an episode of that show. The podcast, I mean, not The Nanny.
Sean, do you know who you are? Where you are?
Where am I? What's going on?
How many fingers am I holding up? That'll be impressive because we're not on video.
Just kidding, guys. This was all of it. I'm having a midlife crisis, which ties into season 3, episode 23. That's Midlife. Directed by Dorothy Lyman, written by Karen Lucas, who I just wanted to see what else she did. And she has most recently created a TV series starring Catherine McPhee called Country Comfort on Netflix. Yep. It looks like about a country star and her family. Yeah. An aspiring young country singer finds the band she's been missing when she takes a job as a nanny for a musically talented family. So how about that? How do you like that? I did not plan that. But yes, this lady went on to create a show on Netflix about a nanny. So,
wow,
there you go.
Well,
this is the one. Yeah, go ahead. Oh wait, I didn't even introduce us. Hi, I'm Sean DiPasquale here with
Victoria Sheffield.
Off to a great start. Victoria, what's this episode about?
Okay, so this is the episode where Mr. Sheffield has a midlife crisis. And I have to say, when I read that description and saw the photo like preview for it on HBO Max, I was dreading this. I thought it was going to be just an episode chocked full of like Mr. Sheffield in like dumb, early 90s cool clothes, or I guess mid 90s cool clothes, like trying to recapture his youth. And I was like, we've kind of been there. We've kind of done that. But I was so pleasantly surprised. That's not really where this went. Like it had little tiny elements of that. But overall, very pleased that that's not what we got.
No, we got a much weirder episode.
Well, as we were saying before the record started, it had that little bit of that Simpsons energy where the opener and like the seeming the thing you think it's gonna be about is not at all what it's about. Because we start off
the cold open has nothing to do with the episode at all.
Yes, it just sort of like physically sort of gets us to where we need to be later for an episode to happen. But so we're at this is a real place. It was called the Official All-Star Cafe in New York City. And I think it was owned by the people who like ran Planet Hollywood. And the whole Sheffield family and Fran are there eating lunch. Which
was Stallone, Bruce Willis, and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh yeah,
that's who owned Planet Hollywood. Many people forget, but those three guys were the most popular, famous action movie stars of their time. They opened up a restaurant.
Yeah. Hey,
as you do,
predated Wahlburgers.
That's right.
Which is the Mark Wahlberg and his brothers restaurant.
Yep.
But so I feel like a lot of people outside of LA might think I just made a joke, but that really is a restaurant here. But so anyway, they are at this big tennis tournament. They're eating lunch. We actually get a cameo from a then famous tennis player named Monica Seles, who I didn't remember, but she was a big tennis pro at the time. And the thing that I liked about this setup and this joke is she's actually waiting tables in the restaurant and bussing them. And she opens a bottle of ketchup and she makes that like iconic women's tennis player sound where she's like, ugh, where she opens the ketchup, which I thought was a great joke. But anyway, this is all a big setup.
It was very silly.
For Fran to be like, I always had wanted to learn tennis. And Brighton is like, well, I can always teach you. So all of that still has nothing to do with what this episode's about.
No.
We then cut to the kitchen the next morning. And I love this. Mr. Sheffield is going through all of these papers like Variety, New York Times, and there are big sections cut out of them. And he's like,
which we've seen them do this to him before. So I actually instantly was like, oh, he must have gotten bad reviews.
Yes. Because he goes, Niles, please tell me you cut out all the reviews of my new show because they were so good you're getting them framed. And Niles just is like, okay. Meaning that's definitely not the reason he cut them out. So Mr. Sheffield has another big flop. And this was also a really good exchange. Niles is like, sir, you still are so much more fortunate than so many people in this world. Some of them in this room, meaning him, because Niles is the only other person in the room. And Mr. Sheffield goes, You're right, Niles. Look at you, a servant. Been doing the same job for 25 years. No future. Probably will be doing it until the day you die. And it's like, he's not even trying to rub it in. He's just genuinely like having this moment of lost in thought of how horrible Niles' life is.
He is genuinely this disconnected with anyone that isn't him, that like he says all of this not meaning any harm, and also not conceiving that any harm could be done by this. It's truly very upsetting.
And then he goes, and then he goes, but you know what's really bothering me? And Niles goes, carrying that big fat wallet around. But anyway, so it then is revealed that what's really bothering him is that he's 42 years old and he's never really achieved anything. He's like,
by the way, this sent me into a spiral that I will never probably recover from.
So this episode actually sent Sean into his midlife crisis.
Yeah, no shit. I was like, he's 42.
Yeah, and he's like, well, and he's just, just done one mediocre play after another. This is the real emotional
I was like, at least you've done plays.
I know, at least you've done something. But there's as we get to the resolution of this episode, we can make Sean feel better with some things as well, though. Which
nothing made me feel better, but nothing will ever make me feel better.
It is a prescription for Vicodin. But so.
We also go on.
Well, but then we also, I'm not even going to get into it because it's such a throwaway little joke, but we have a quick Cece beat where we find out she plans to get herself cryogenically frozen, which we don't really go anywhere with that, but it just reestablishes this, like,
which, by the way, older. I think put that one in your back pocket for if they ever let us pitch what the Nanny reboot or revival show is.
Cece in the future, or the whole family in the future?
I think we bring Cece out of cryogenic frozen. Like, that
is great. I love that.
Like, everyone else is like just been living their lives, but then when we catch up with Cece, she's just been uncryogenically frozen, and they're like, "Why did you pick now?" And she's like, "I don't know. I thought this would be the future." And they're like, "It's not."
And all her jokes and like all her references will be from 25 years earlier.
Yes, and we make some joke about how it wasn't like good cryogenic freezing because she also aged.
Yeah. It's big. I love it.
If a certain co-creator is listening, you can have that one for free.
But not for free because it comes with a price.
Yeah, but not that much for free. It comes with a price, and the price is us in your writer's room. We're delightful. Okay.
But so that Fran also comes into the kitchen at this point, and Brighton enters, and he tells her that he can't do their tennis lesson because he has to, read a book for school. So Niles suggests that Mr. Sheffield takes Fran to the courts that day. And at first he's like, "Oh, the last thing I need is a round of amateur tennis, Niles." But then Niles, I wrote, who knows his little baby boy so well. He goes, "But sir, you'll be able to crush her, making her feel like even more of a loser than you feel like today." And so that makes Mr. Sheffield reconsider. And he's like, "Oh, right, I'll do it." Because he's so petty and juvenile that he just really needs a win. Yeah. But it backfires because we then cut to Fran and Mr. Sheffield returning from the tennis courts, and she has beaten him. And he is in like a huge irrational huff about this. Like, he's
There was something about her voice when she walked in the kitchen here that made me write down, I want Fran and Natasha Lyonne to do a show together.
Oh, wow.
I think that would be they would be so funny. Like, I think they would be great together. Anyway, putting that out in the universe.
Yeah, that'd be good too. She could be Val's daughter in the reboot.
That's actually genius casting. She sure could.
Oh, yeah.
That would be so funny.
Right?
Actually, that's actually really, really good casting. Yeah. Even if just for like a guest star for an episode, Oh, my daughter's coming over. And Fran's like, "Oh, I love her." Like Fran's like a huge fan of Val's daughter.
Yeah. Oh, so many ideas. Burn me with ideas this week. It's because it's a Thursday, not a Sunday. We're always more energetic for some reason.
Well, by Sunday, we've drowned those ideas with tequila.
So then, Fran has beat Mr. Sheffield. He's completely overreacting. And so Fran takes Niles aside in the living room. And Gracie's also sitting there, like, reading a book. And Fran's like, "Niles, he's really going off the deep end about this. Like, you know what I think this means?" And then Gracie puts down her book and she goes, that daddy's inability to deal with minor setbacks is an indication of a larger underlying emotional problem. And so we've got little wise Gracie again. She's back.
To be fair, she is reading a psychology book.
Yeah, she's back when we need her back, and sometimes she's a kid when they need a kid. But hey, what are we going to do about it? But so Fran is sort of like, well, yeah, exactly. And she's like, you know what? I'm going to book a therapy session for him. But, the family also knows they can never actually get Mr. Sheffield to agree to go to therapy. So the plan is to bring him under false pretenses to Gracie's therapist by saying like, oh, Gracie's therapist needs to talk to us about her. Really, it will be a session for you. I have a question where I was like, do you think she told the therapist this was her plan beforehand? Because it seems a little unethical. I don't know if that's allowed. Who knows? But
it does. It's very unethical.
Yes, you've been tricked. You've been hoodwinked into
therapy,
into self-growth. But so we then cut to Gracie's therapist's office, and it's Fran and Mr. Sheffield, and a receptionist comes in and is like, oh, Dr. Bork couldn't make it today. So we have one of his colleagues.
This was so weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have, or I guess one of her colleagues sort of as a substitute. Mm-hmm. And at first Fran's like, no, I don't want to see anybody else. But then Dr. Joyce Brothers walks in.
Time out. Did you remember who this is?
Yeah. If someone said Dr. Joyce Brothers, I might not know. I would think of a little blonde woman, and I would think advice columnist, therapist lady. Like,
okay. Yeah. Interesting. See, and I, before they went there, immediately went to, the Hollywood Squares lady.
Oh, wow.
That was my first thought, as I was like, it's the lady, the doctor from Hollywood Squares. I never knew what she really did, but I saw her very often on Hollywood Squares growing up as a kid and being like, oh yeah, it's a doctor. Her and the other one was when they first said in this episode, oh, she's not going to be here, but we have another doctor. My first thought was, it's going to be Dr. Ruth or somebody, because that was the other Hollywood Squares doctor who you would see, who was like, and I know her, she was like the sex lady, like I knew that. And I thought, that'll be funny. And but I wasn't expecting this. And this lady actually was very funny.
Yes. And it's interesting that you say that that's your context for her, because that's going to tie into trivia later. Because this definitely I guess I was going to say this was an era. It's still an era. We still have Dr. Phil, we have Dr. Oz, but of these quote unquote professionals sort of leveraging it to segue into celebrity, which is a little suspect. Yeah. But so, Dr. Joyce was, she wrote a lot of books on popular psychology. She had a radio show. She was like a well-known personality of the time. And, at first, Mr. Sheffield is really resistant to this session, but he ultimately, kind of reveals that what's really eating at him is that even after having every opportunity and advantage in the world and coming from a lot of privilege, he has not amounted to much. And I wrote, he's recognizing his privilege. And I thought that was pretty progressive for a rich Republican dude in 1996.
Me too.
I
perked up at that little speech because I was like, oh, wow, that's very introspective for a guy to be like, look, it's not that he's like, I'm depressed and I don't see that I have it made. It's quite the opposite. He's like, look, I have all of this stuff, but that doesn't mean I've done anything. I've barely made it, yes. And I've coasted on the money that I have. And yeah, I get it. That's, hey man, it's all too real, Maxwell.
Yes. And he's because the thing is, he had really thought that this most recent show that was a flop was going to be his Cats, because he's not, we sometimes don't fully get this idea, because sometimes, people are like, Maxwell Sheffield, famous producer, but he is B team in that world. He not
makes
considered
moderate. He makes moderate hits that are almost never critically acclaimed, it seems. And so people know his name because he's done a bunch of stuff, but he doesn't have the prestige of wow, this guy is really producing great shows. It's interesting. They're really putting him through the ringer, because this is comes right off the heels of the last episode where he's struggling with his masculinity so much, and he's desperate to be seen as masculine, and now he's going through it with his whether or not he's worth any, his self-worth is now on the line. It's interesting. This episode depressed me.
Yes. Well, yeah, because
But go on.
So we then cut to the kitchen several days later. Niles and Fran are there, and Cece comes running in a panic because she's like, Maxwell just called me. He says he's quitting the theater. Like he is out of the industry. And then, he no sooner does she say that, does he come down the stairs. He's in a ridiculous, like kind of quote unquote hip outfit, like tight jeans, a black shirt.
He is just like the boys from 90210 at the time.
Totally.
That's how they dressed him. He's in like it, and which is I didn't realize until watching this, but like it's so interesting how 90s young men's fashion was just like an update throwback to greaser fashion, because that's what like all of the people that were in charge of fashion at that point had grew up in like greaser era. So and like because he looked like a greaser. But like not, because then if you look at like Jason Priestley of the era, he also had like a weird like James Dean thing going, and it's like, where does this come from?
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, and so that's what made me think of.
Yeah, it's also funny now because now certain trends for women from the 90s are so in, but that particular trend is definitely not in for men right now.
No. If anything, we've gone the other way now. Where like now men's fashion seems to be like updated fascism. Like those weird like those like Nazi youth haircuts that everyone's getting.
Ooh, yeah. Makes us very uncomfortable.
Makes me very uncomfortable anyway.
Hey, just be grateful you have a big head of hair at your age and you can have any haircut you want. That's what your pep talk will be at the end of this episode.
Thank you.
But so and Mr. Sheffield, speaking of hair, he's even dyed his gray streak, which makes Fran irate because she had always wanted to dye it for him. And so he kind of comes in, he's very much like, bada beep, bada boop, like, what's the big deal? Like, I've decided I'm just going to, enjoy the rest of the time I have on this earth, and I'm going to like stop trying, and I'm just going to enjoy life. And he like walks out, and they're all like, oh God, what are we going to do? This is just bad news for all of us. Especially Cece, who would be out of a job.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
But so this episode was so breezy that, we're almost at the wrap up at this point because Fran then that evening goes to her mom's house or her mom and dad's apartment in Queens. And she's like, Mom, like, what do I do? Like, Mr. Sheffield's having this huge midlife crisis. And Sylvia goes, marry him. And Fran goes, that's not going to fix the problem. And she goes, who cares? We should at least be happy. I thought it was
once again, Sylvia shows up to absolutely like destroy everything she's in. She's so good.
Stealer. And so then there's this aggressive honk outside the apartment complex, and Fran looks out the window, and it's Mr. Sheffield. He has shown up in this over the top Porsche, I don't know. It's red, it's flashy, it screams midlife crisis. And he's like, Miss Fine, like, come on down. I just bought this new car. Which she then goes down the fire escape instead of the stairs. Well,
it triggers because it triggers Fran's mom, Sylvia, to go like, you better get down there. All of the neighborhood women are going to flock him. And then this was like my favorite. I loved this moment where like all of these like women are like these like Fran sort of clones are just like lurking around his car, and they're like leering at him. It's so funny. And they're like, oh, hey, do you need a lady? So Fran like kind of frantically climbs down the fire escape to get there quickly. It's really good. It's a really good bit.
And she's like, shoo, she's like, get out of here. And she's like, Debbie, you're engaged. like shame on you.
Yeah, she's like really mad at these. She literally treats them like she's shooing off like when you go to like a petting zoo and there's like too many baby goats near you, and you're like, come on, get back, everybody, get back.
Yes. So she climbs down there and she gets over to him, and then she shoos all these women away, and then they just have this really nice kind of calm conversation where they're sort of like walking the block together and sitting on a stoop. And Mr. Sheffield, he sort of reiterates again, he's like, maybe you don't understand because we were, raised so differently, but I had the best education money could buy. I was set up for, to be able to do whatever I wanted because I had so much privilege, and I still didn't do that much. And I was like, this could be considered low-key insulting to Fran if she was a different type of person, because I think she was like, he's like, I wasn't raised like you. I wasn't just raised to find a husband. And I was like, but to be fair, that is kind of how Fran was raised. So there is truth to it. But
yeah, I mean, it's not an insult because he's not generalizing or stereotyping anything. He's saying like, you were raised in a much more loving household, but also a household that directed you towards wanting different things. And I was like, not really given that,
Well, and here's the thing though, I would say he didn't even, I think, acknowledge or understand or realize the loving household part of it. He was more just in the zone of like, I had so much money and I was, pushed towards a certain track and I had advantages that you didn't have. But that's when Fran kind of turns it around on him and gives him this really, like, I think, lovely perspective where she's like, well, yeah, you had certain advantages that I didn't, but you were also sent away to boarding school at 6 years old. And she's like, did you ever get to run into your parents' bedroom when you were scared during a thunderstorm? Like, where were your mom and dad when you lost your first tooth? And it's very clear that, Mr. Sheffield doesn't have any of those memories or experiences because he was, raised in this like cold, emotional void. And she's like, I know. And she's like, I actually think I had the privileged childhood, when framed in that way. And then she's also like, and a lot of people with your kind of money would have just rested on their laurels and spent their life, jet setting and sitting on yachts. Like, you came to this country all on your own and you decided to work. Like, you didn't have to, and you raised 3 wonderful children, even though you're emotionally dysfunctional, and and you did it on your own. And this really does make him feel better, where he's like, oh yeah, like I had certain types of advantages, but I also had certain disadvantages because my parents were horrible. So, and I was like, that's really sweet. And it was a real conversation. And we've often talked about like, oh, is this show ever going to sort of like check Mr. Sheffield's privilege? And I think this was a really nice, like, way to handle it in the context of like 22 minutes where you're not going to get that deep into, these issues. But,
I really enjoyed, I thought this segment was really, first of all, we should acknowledge we don't really get a lot of these types of scenes just from a direction standpoint. Like I don't think we've ever really gotten like 2 people walking through multiple city blocks before on this show. Mm-hmm. It's normally like, it's a sitcom. So it's 3 cameras. It's very stagnant usually. This was like really pretty and it was like nice and it fit this scene really. Like, I was glad that they chose to do this instead of setting this scene like in the kitchen or in the living room or, there was like a life to this and it made it feel almost more real and grounded, that it was just like the 2 of them just kind of like having this like rational like discussion. So I thought this was great. I also remember, well, let's finish up the episode and then we can talk about sort of where this episode sits in like 90s sitcom world.
Well, we have that really lovely conversation and then we just end in the sex joke because then he's like, he's like, well, Miss Fine, like now that I'm feeling better, what do you, say we like go out on one last hurrah? And you're like, is he saying they should do it or something? Cut to them in this absurd car, which he clearly doesn't really know how to drive. And he's not even used to driving on this side of the road. And the car's like bumping up and down and he's going really fast and Fran's like, and he's like, oh God. And it's clearly like, metaphor for sex. And then the car stalls and just putters out. And then she's like,
bump.
Yeah. And then she's like, I just had a flashback to my ex-boyfriend. So clearly, yeah. So that was how that ended, but it was still fine. It was fine.
Yeah, it was cute. Like, it was very cheesy, but it was like they needed a funny button because they couldn't just end it on like this like very loving conversation because that's not how comedy works. Mm-hmm. So it was fine. But this was a very, very good episode. And I think now we should talk about some segments. And now, segments.
So, segments.
Yeah, no, I think we should move on to segments.
We can move on to our segments.
And now, segments.
Segments with Sean and Toria. Favorite lines and moments?
Well, I think my favorite moment in the whole episode was the walk through the city. I really liked it a lot. Thought it was great. Favorite lines, I liked in the very beginning, there was a line about Fran wanting to learn tennis.
Oh, I have this line too.
Yeah, and then her going, but it's a big time commitment and I had career aspirations. And Gracie goes, what happened?
Yeah, well, it's an even funnier setup because she goes, Fran goes, I always wanted to learn to play tennis. And then Gracie goes, what happened? And then she goes, well, it's a big time commitment and I was very career oriented. And then there's another beat. And then Gracie goes, what happened?
What happened? Why aren't you career oriented?
Oh, gee. Or like, why is your life not better?
I also like Fran. Brighton was like, hey, I'll teach you how to do. What was he? Is he going to teach you tennis? He's like,
I can teach you tennis if you want.
Yeah. And she's like, no, I'm going to go talk to this sexy guy over there first and see if he'll teach me tennis. And she like walks off screen and comes immediately back in. And she's like, all right, I'm all yours, Brighton. And they all like, are like, okay. And my note was that like, I kind of like how the whole family is just losers, but like they're in it together, Yeah. It's really cute. Anyway, that was fun. And then also there was a line later on where they're talking about Maxwell and they go, he's got no sense of humor. That's why his comedies are a flop.
Yes. Niles goes, he has no sense of humor. That's why his shows always fail.
Well, he says that's why his comedies always fail specifically, which is such a mean, like the guy can't even pick a good comedy. He has such a bad sense of humor. It's not like he's writing them.
It does track, though. Mr. Sheffield does seem like he wouldn't really be able to pick out a good comedy.
Agreed.
I really like this line where after they kind of realize that Mr. Sheffield's going through something, she goes, at least this isn't like when my father had his midlife crisis. He wanted Ma to get into swinging. And Cece goes, Cece's like, well, what happened? And she goes, the swingers saw them.
So mean.
You can't even get into it. And then I mentioned a ton of my favorite lines throughout because I just like them so much already. For Yiddish, I don't know if we've had this one yet, but it is an obvious one. Correct me if I'm wrong, listeners. Tukis, which just means your tush. It's your bottom.
I think we've had tukis before. We had to have tukis.
How do we have tukis? We must.
A little tukis. Come on.
Well, because Fran, after
my grandma used to say, I'll give you a pachin tukis, which meant she will spank your little bum. But she would only do it. She would go like, boop, boop, boop.
So very cute. Well, she goes when she comes back with Mr. Sheffield, she's like, who cares? No one was even keeping score. And then she turns to Niles and goes, I creamed his little English tukis. Okay. Trivia. This isn't really nanny trivia. This is Dr. Joyce Brothers trivia because when I Googled her, I went down a rabbit hole and it was fascinating.
I like to be the voice of the listener at home going, God damn it. They're not going to do nanny trivia this week.
Not even nanny trivia.
I like to imagine someone in their car punching their radio.
Someone just throwing a full plate of food across the room.
Smashing their phone.
So here's the thing. Well, Dr. Joyce Brothers, was a famous psychologist.
Yeah.
She was first made famous in 1955 when she was just in her 20s.
A porn star.
Better, or should I say worse. She won the $64,000 question game show. There was a question called the $64,000 question, which was the equivalent of like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
She was like a game show winner, and then
so here's the thing, which is funny that she was then in Hollywood Squares. She was a woman who she had gone. This is actually incredibly impressive for somebody in the 1950s. She had gotten her undergraduate degree from Cornell, and then she went and got her degree in psychology from Columbia. She was literally in her 20s, this little blonde. You can see the very old black and white footage of this episode on YouTube.
Interesting.
And she had, and the $64,000 question, it filmed in New York. So she decided to go to, like a pre-interview and, kind of like apply to be on it. And she apparently told them in the initial interview that, she could answer questions about like homemaking or psychology. And they said, to be honest, like we like to cast against type. Like that's what makes contestants interesting, like unexpected. They're like, you have way more likely getting on this show if you were an expert in like football or boxing or something. And so she went back home and she spent like the next 8 weeks completely absorbing herself in boxing trivia. And she became like a trivia, savant in boxing. So then she goes back and reapplies and says she's this little homemaker in her 20s who is a boxing expert. And they cast her. And she first became very famous because she got like the easy, it's the way that the show would work is I think you'd first appear and do like a $4,000 question. And then you get to come back the next week and you do like a $16,000. Sure. It would up and up. So she did the $4,000 question, kind of easy peasy. The story goes, they didn't actually want her to win. They wanted this other contestant to win. So when she got to her $16,000 question, they give her 4 questions that are like literally some of the most obscure, difficult questions you've ever heard about boxing. And she answers all of them. And they're like, holy shit.
She's a little weirdo.
Yeah, she's a little weirdo. And so then she ends up making it and like winning.
Good for her. Wow.
But this is where the story gets incredibly strange.
Oh my God.
Not even
this is going to be longer than the episode.
Here's the thing. The show ended up getting a huge amount of legal heat from the New York Attorney General's office because they decided that there's no way these contestants actually know these answers and that this show is a fraud and that they're giving these contestants the answers beforehand.
Well, this is like the movie Quiz Show.
Yeah, or the new Nathan Field. This reminded me of that new Nathan Fielder episode, actually, because they basically accused the show of like fraudulent behavior. And the New York Attorney General, I don't know why this was a priority, but took the show to court in a huge national scandal. Dr. Joyce Brothers had to be interviewed by a New York grand jury for 6 hours. And where a lot of this was just peppering her with boxing questions, all of which she answered. So they like couldn't prove that the show was like actually
so weird.
cheating.
I can't believe this happened again. I mean, you know Quiz Show, right? You know that movie Quiz Show?
No.
Oh, first of all, great movie, 1994, directed by Robert Redford. Fantastic movie. Ralph Fiennes is in it. John Turturro is in it. I mean, it's phenomenal. But what it's about is it's a dramatization of the 21 quiz show scandals of the 1950s. Which is where a U.S. congressional lawyer investigated accusations of game show fixing by the show producers. This was like a big, big deal and led to like all of the rules and stuff that govern like modern day game shows. So it's interesting that this then repeated itself, it sounds like, a couple years later with the pyramid, oh yeah, $64,000 question. That's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is what it must be based on.
Well, so no, so the quiz show, majority of quiz show is accurate to real life events, although it had artistic license, blah, blah, blah. For legal reasons, alterations had to be made to Matthew Rosenhaus, who was the CEO of the company that owned Geritol at the time. His name was changed. And his personality reflected that of Charles Revson, who was the president of the cosmetics brand Revlon that sponsored another quiz show that was part of the same scandal, $64,000 question. So this is all part of the same scandal. So the thing you're talking about was turned into a movie called Quiz Show. Everyone should go watch it if you haven't seen it. It is truly, truly a fantastic movie. Like, great movie. I'm shocked you haven't seen it, Toria. You'll love this movie.
I have to watch it. But anyway, that is what Dr. Joyce Brothers first made headlines for in her life.
Fascinating. Wow, that's crazy. I've seen Quiz Show a million times. I didn't realize they don't really bring her into that. And I guess because she wasn't like an important enough or like a large enough part of the whole thing, and because there was like other game shows that were involved in this.
Yeah. And then, there
crazy.
you go. There you go. And then for the Fran or the Cece, I said, I feel like I was Mr. Sheffield, and sounds like you did too.
Yeah, I'm Mr. Sheffield in this episode. I don't want to talk about it, Toria. So, yeah, I just think it's interesting that a lot of shows at this time did midlife crisis episodes, and they all portrayed them in very similar ways, where it was like the guy dyes his hair and he gets a Ferrari and he, changes the way he dresses. And I don't know, when I hit midlife, I just got like sad kind of. I didn't get that desire to do any of that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think it's because you're more depressive than these people, because these people are all attempting to feel differently by recapturing youth or buying clothes or things that are going to make them feel different, whereas you've just submitted to feeling bad.
No, I see. I mean, that's one way to look at it, but I look at it like I have evolved to the point where I understand that those things aren't what's going to actually fix the problem. Why would I waste my time and money going and buying like a really expensive car? That's not going to make me feel better, and I don't really need to I also don't have that my hitting 40s wasn't like, I need to relive my youth. I'm old. I feel young. I don't need to relive my youth. I'm surrounded by toys and comic books that I love. You know what I mean? That's not the problem.
If anything, those are the problem.
No, my babies. All right, but listen, that's neither here nor there, because we've reached the end, and I need to remind folks that if they want to make me feel better and or worse about my midlife crises, they can find us on Oh Mr. Chef Pod on Twitter and Instagram. That's Oh Mr. Chef Pod with 2 F's and 1 P. And then also, if you love the show, or if you only feel the, nothing, just disconnected emptiness for the show, or if you hate it, please leave a 5-star review and rate it and share it with your friends. And, or if you hate it, share it with your enemies and punish them. Either way, it gets more people to listen, which is good for everybody. And, on that note, Toria, I think it's time to say goodbye.
Okay, so long, farewell. We'll see you guys next week. Goodbye.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye.
The Flushing Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.